Good evening and welcome to the June 25th, 2019 City Council meeting. And we'll start out with our roll call.
Bartlett.
Here.
Boersma.
Here.
Caravello.
Here.
Hume.
Here.
Hiley.
Here.
Hirsch.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
Lagaki.
Here.
Mayeski.
Here.
Reeves.
Here.
Riley.
Present.
Schumacher.
Here.
There are 12 alders present.
Thank you, Holly. Are there any communications tonight from any council members? No communications? Okay, I have a couple. We did receive a letter from Bill Buckingham, who works for Resource Engineering regarding the well for the contamination at the new City Hall site. And we've instructed them to do a letter for the DNR. We think they're going to close that site for contamination. So we'll give you some more information when we hear back, but it sounds pretty encouraging that they're going to consider that captain good. So wanted to give you an update on that. They call that a no further action letter. We did receive a TIF request from Ford Development Group on Friday for phase 2. So we'll be hearing more about that in future meetings. I think that maybe Ford Development Group has reached out to some of you to set up meetings. If you want a copy of the request, we can certainly provide that, or if you have any questions, Jamin or myself would be more than happy to sit down. We're in the process of going through the request and doing some verification and some analysis on that, and we'd like to review that before we bring it to the Finance Committee for consideration. So that's where we're at on that. And then we're going to have a couple of guests coming up in the future, and I'll get you the dates. But Executive Parisi, we're working on rescheduling a date with him. And then also Jerry Deshane from the League of Municipality will be here to speak on the league issues. They're our lobbyist group, so we'll see both of them at a future meeting. That's all I had. One last time for any council communications. Anybody think of anything while I was talking? Hearing none. We do have a presentation tonight. Steve Steinhoff is here from Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, also known as CARPC. Steve is an agency director, and he's going to speak to us regarding a survey they did.
Thank you, Mayor Swadley, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you the results of the Greater Madison Vision survey that was we held last fall. I'm happy to share this information with you and hope you can put it to good use. So, next slide, please. First of all, just a really brief overview of why CARPC is doing this. As one of 9 regional planning commissions in the state, we are all charged under state statutes with the function and duty of making and adopting a master plan for the physical development of the region. The last time that a regional planning commission in this area did that was 1997, so we're way behind the curve, and we're trying to get back to our mandate of regional planning, and we started with this initiative of Greater Madison Vision. Next slide, please. This was an initiative to bring together leaders from across the region. On the handout that I gave you on the back are the members of the steering committee, and we also, in addition to building broad-based leadership, wanted to reach out to the public to hear from them about what they see as important for the future. So the purpose of the survey was not only to gather information about what the priorities of the public, but also to inform people about possible futures and their implications for growth. We can expect about 150,000 more people in Dane County in the next 25 years or so, and that has a big impact, and we know that how we grow matters, and the more that we work together to manage that growth towards common ends, the better the region will be. And also we wanted to promote this initiative of Greater Madison Vision, raise awareness of it, so that as the survey results come out, they can be more influential. Next slide, please. So we launched the survey on September 12th. We held launch day events in 7 different locations all around the region, including at the Norwegian Heritage Center, as you can see by those pictures. So there are members of the Regional Planning Commission and Mayor Swadley were there. And I also should note that I'm just going to give you a really high level overview of the survey results. There's a lot more information available online and otherwise, but this is really just to give you the broad strokes. Next slide, please. We also had the good fortune of getting sponsorships. We did a lot of outreach for the survey because we really wanted to get as many people to take it as possible. The more people that take it, the more influential, the more we hit our goals. So these sponsors helped us pay for some media and both paid and hiring some people to help us with media, something that a normal public agency doesn't really have the budget to do. Next slide, please. We targeted a lot of, we did our outreach to target what we saw as traditionally underrepresented groups, for example, communities in the outlying area. We had a pretty good sense that people who live on the Isthmus and Madison love to participate in these kinds of things, and we probably didn't have to do a huge amount of outreach or to reach them. So we targeted our outreach in outlying areas, rural areas, communities of color, low-income communities. And this was a final count, almost 9,200 people, about 8,700 from the 8-county region, Dane and the surrounding counties, about 8,300 from Dane County, about over 2,100 comments. More than 1 in 5 people submitted comments. So we were really pleased with this showing. Next slide, please. The survey itself presented 4 alternative futures. Each of these futures reflected one big area of change that we can expect in the future: population growth and change, which I mentioned, as well as technology changes, things that will affect how we grow, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, and who knows what else in the next 25 years, environmental changes, primarily in this case climate change and water pollution that affects our region, and societal and governmental changes. And next slide, please. So there were each scenario, people walked through 4 different strategies that communities could take to address those changes. And we asked people to rank those in order of importance from top to bottom. When they got through all 4 strategies, they had a list of 4 scenarios. They had a list of 16 strategies, rank ordered from top to bottom. So when you add up all the 80, now if we're looking at the region, 8,700 people who took it, now we have a list of 8,700 lists of 16 strategies, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and we can aggregate those and see what the priorities are for the region as a whole. Next slide, please. The scenarios also presented how growth might happen in each of those futures, ranging from more compact to less compact, and et cetera. And we presented data estimating different outcomes that those different growth patterns would generate. And we asked people to pick which growth option they thought was best for the region. So that generated data as well. Next slide, please. So the result I mentioned, we tried to target to get diverse input. We had success on a number of fronts. Age, you can see a pretty dispersed breakdown. Youth was overrepresented. We targeted youth in particular too. We did outreach to schools, high schools, and youth groups. We even had cash prizes that we offered for schools and groups that generated the most number of surveys. So that it was good to see youth participating in this. By race, about 17% of the participants were people of color compared to 20% of the Dane County population, so reasonably close there. Some groups were, like African Americans, were pretty much right on, and others not as much so. Geography, We're actually more represented in terms of share of the population in outlying areas than in the central urban area in Madison. And where we fell more short was in income and education. So it's probably not a surprise that higher income, higher educated people are overrepresented on the survey. Next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly go through the top, what we came up with as 8 sort of key findings or takeaways based on the priority rankings, the growth option votes, and the comments. We read and categorized each comment into different categories, 100 different categories, and we totaled them up, and that way we could get some more quantitative data out of the comments as well. So the top ranked 2 strategies were more renewable energy and green infrastructure. Now those bar charts show groupings. So the first bar, number 1, is the number of times that strategy was selected as either priority 1, 2, 3, or 4 out of 16. And then the second bar is priorities 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So it's really a way to better grasp, better present and understand the data. These both were part of the conservation scenario, which focused on addressing climate change and water pollution. I was frankly somewhat surprised that these emerged at the top. I mean, our experience in the past is that more economic issues really rose to the top. But next slide, please. But one factor that likely influenced the survey results were the flooding that the region experienced just a few weeks before the kickoff date. So probably people had that in mind. Both of those strategies were related to, well, one of them was directly related to flood resilience, the green infrastructure, which is about capturing more snow melt, rainfall where it falls, and having less runoff into lakes and rivers, which when you have large volumes, means if you can withhold some of that volume, you're reducing the risks of flood, and that was really what that targeted at. And then, more renewable energy also is addressing climate change as well. Next slide, please. So the next 2 groups of high-ranked strategies are really more about getting back to those economic and access to resources and opportunity desires. So more community-based resources. Number 3 overall was about better access in your community to things like healthcare, job training, healthy food, etc., and better connect education and work, which was ranked, no surprise, very high among high school students. It was more about getting good training and into a pipeline for a good job and a good career. These 2 were really also ranked number 1 and 2 by people in higher need areas, elderly, rural, low-income groups. So it's important to pay attention not just to the overall rankings, but some of the how they break down by some of the groups as well. Next slide, please. After those 2 high-level climate change and opportunity gaps fall, the issue of transportation and housing popped up, and the strategy of expanding transit, which is really about better connecting communities around Madison and communities around the region through a regional transit, better and real regional transit system. And expanding housing options was really more about a wider range of housing choices for a broader range of households to meet a broader range of need. The support for the ranking of these varied. Expanding transit was typically more higher ranking in the central urban area, although when you get to Stoughton, you'll see actually that the Stoughton zip code ranked at the second highest. Expanded housing options was generally ranked higher by people in higher levels of need, again, low income, communities of color, rural, elderly, and not as much lower among youth. Both of these not as high among youth. And so we call the first ring communities around the central urban area did not rank expanding housing options very high. Next slide, please. This is getting back to where it's important to pay attention to groups, and because in this case, preserving more farming areas, and note that that's not just farmland, that's farming areas, which has a broader meaning, was ranked high, number 3, by people who it's identified as living in rural areas. But because they're only 10% of the population and 10% of the survey takers, that strategy did not rank very high overall. But it's, again, it's an important thing to note. Next slide, please. In terms of how the selections for those growth options, the growth options of conservation, community, and innovation all ranked, got high number of votes. Conservation, the highest, which really was focused on directing growth away from expanded environmental corridors. Community and innovation had more compact expansion and more infill and redevelopment. And the numbers, if you look on page 12 of this report, it's a little more detail about the data, description of those scenarios in terms of the land use components and transportation, and how the data elements from our modeling software played out. But summing it all up is really that people, as it said, people are really looking for more conservation-oriented growth, and using that word in the broader sense of not just land and environment, but also fiscal resources, the community innovation, cost less in terms of infrastructure, households pay less in terms of transportation and energy, measures like that as well, vehicle miles driven per household, so conservation in the broader sense. Next slide, please. I mentioned the comments, and we categorized them. The comment category that had the largest number of comments was really about people saying they felt it was a false choice, or they didn't really like having to pick one growth option, or really the prioritizing they felt was difficult or didn't make sense, because so many of them are so related: housing, transportation, energy, and that really we need to approach these as interrelated challenges with integrated solutions. As you can see by the comment, I won't read it, it's in your handout as well. Next slide, please. So getting to the 7th and 8th, I wanted to just touch on, because youth are going to be the decision makers of the future, the 25-year time horizon. They're going to be sitting at tables like this more than me, that's for certain. And so they were more oriented towards sustainability, not only the climate change related strategies, but also local energy production, local food production. If you notice in the self-reliance scenario, which was more about communities need to have a sort of go it alone approach, because they're just declining support from state and federal government, and take care of our own. Really got a small number of votes, as well as some of the strategies like more online communication, meaning that you're going to take care of more of your needs, by ordering things online and working remotely, and a lot of the comments express a desire for more, not fewer, social connections. So really people do want to be connected socially and across the region. Next slide, please. So finally, the survey can be broken down by zip code, and so there you see, and it's at your handout as well, the Stoughton zip code results, and the top strategies were more community-based resources, expand transit, green infrastructure, more local energy production, better connect education and work. So you're seeing a lot of the same ones I went over, but not quite the same order. This is a screenshot from the online. You can go to Greater Madison Vision that should say com. I need to correct that on the next one. The greatermadisonvision.com, and you can click on any zip code or combination of zip codes. You can click on the demographic breakdowns, and you'll get a page will pop up that show, like on the back of yours, it'll show how different demographics or geographic breakdowns voted or priorities. Next slide, please. So now where do we go from here? So why am I even out here talking to you and making presentations around the region? Because really, the steering committee members really want to see these results get put to use. So you can use this data, these results in your local planning and decision making. I know you recently updated your comp plan a couple years ago, but you may be doing neighborhood-based plans or other planning. Or if you're pursuing similar strategies and you're looking for information to back them up, and the survey results can do that as well. Next slide, please. And then Greater Madison Vision is looking at pulling this together with either some kind of a vision statement or action items that they think prioritize for the region to pursue. CARPC will be updating its regional land use plan, as I mentioned, a plan for the physical development of the region over the next year, using these as guiding the process. And we're also, CARPC is starting an initiative called Regional Planning for Flood Resilience, which is looking at talking with communities around the region about how we can better work together to reduce the volume, again, through green infrastructure and strategies like that, reduce the flood volume. Looking at Yahara Winds as a model, if you're familiar with that, which has been a successful collaborative by governments and the sewage district to phosphorus reduction. And so that's in the early stages, and we'd welcome your participation in that as well. And next slide, please. So that's, as I said, it's a high-level overview. There's you can lots of opportunities to dig deeper. At this point, I'll just entertain any questions you may have. Yes.
Alderperson Boersma, go ahead.
That is there an overseeing group for regional transportation? Is there any sort of central place that people can go to start for regional transportation?
Yes, there is the Madison Area Transportation Planning Board, or also known as the MPO, the federal acronym, Metropolitan Planning Organization. And your Alder, Alder Caravello is your representative on that body. So they are the regional transportation planning body. Stoughton is within that region.
My observation is that we've talked about this for a lot for the last number of years.
Yes.
We really haven't done anything completely about it.
Yes, I would agree
Whether or
with that.
not the communities can get together more or whatever, that would make it more plausible that we'll have at some point
Yeah,
bus service or small
Right.
or something.
right. The regional transportation plan calls for a combination of bus rapid transit and express bus services to communities like Stoughton. There's the funding barrier that some type of additional local funding source is required by the federal government to get the federal funding, and that's being blocked at the state level because it takes state authorization to establish a regional transportation authority.
I have one just other comment. I think on slide 3, you said the launch date was in September of 2019.
Oh, did I say 19?
I think so.
Oops, I'll have to correct that, sorry. Yeah, it's coming up soon, we're gonna do it again, no.
I'll do it again.
Thank
And
you.
Planning Director Shields also a member as a technical advisor for the planning as well. So we have 2 representatives from Stoughton for the transportation group. Any other questions? And I would just ask you to speak in the microphone so we can hear you. If you want to be heard, go ahead. Alderperson Riley.
Thank you. I'm just curious, and perhaps you can't answer this. Is there any practical way for us to look at rail transit? Obviously, we have this railway right here in town, but I don't know that we've ever looked at that or if that's even practical, but it seems to me that that would be lovely if someday, somehow, some way, we could start looking at that. Is that wholly impractical, or is that something that might be considered long-term?
I think it could be considered long-term. It was considered previously. It was actually even gotten so far as to submit for applications for federal funding for a commuter rail starter line. That was, what, 15 years ago or so. And there was even a regional transit authority established under Governor Doyle. But then when the composition changed after the next election, the regional transit authority was abolished. And so that's, you know, and then when we looked at it again, the planning led to thinking that a bus rapid transit was a better fit for the shorter term, because it's a lot cheaper and you can get a lot of the benefits because it's designed to be rail-like, meaning that it has fewer stops, as much as possible dedicated right-of-way, elevated boarding stations, longer, articulated buses. You buy your ticket on the station, you get on and off like instead of going through the. So it's meant to have. It cuts the travel time and handles higher volumes of people. But it's because it's using existing right-of-way and existing roadways and buses, so cheaper than trains. It's the size of our region and the population base and the ridership level anticipated, that was considered to be a better starting option.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know that you have an answer for this, but I'm curious. Do you have any idea why it is that Walker opposed regional transit authorities? Why it was that they had an objection to them?
Well, and it wasn't just Walker, it was the Assembly and the Senate that,
Fitzgerald.
yeah, passed the legislation that, to abolish regional transit authorities. I think it just falls in the line with being opposed to taxing, new taxing districts, new taxing authorities of any kind.
Thank you.
Alderperson Schumacher.
Alder Riley was reading my mind and what we were talking about. I mean, I think one of the big things that usually will set your cities apart in growth and commerce would be we're lacking a connection between the airport and the downtown area.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you had some sort of even a surface rail connection of that sort of thing, and when you can get your airport involved with that really will drive your commerce on the other end of things.
Yeah. I would note that the innovation growth option did include both BRT and commuter rail. So, that's part of the reason you're getting those higher performing numbers there too.
Alderperson Boersma.
Just one more comment about that. We have most of our cities in Dane County, it seems to me, have taxi service.
Mm-hmm.
And so does Madison, of course. But the cost of getting from Madison to Stoughton or Stoughton to Madison is astronomical on a taxi
Mm-hmm.
service. And again, we've talked about that for years. But the infrastructure for having taxi service may impede the ability to have kind of bus service because we're sort of oriented toward taxi service. I don't know what the solution to that problem is, but at some point we should find one because I know a number of people from Stoughton are required to get to Madison for services or even other communities and just don't have that option at this point. If they don't have a car and they can't afford a taxi,
Yeah.
they're kind of stuck.
there are a variety of supported ride services that Dane County Human Services funds and through a lot of federal funding, and the MPO recently approved the updated plan for the coordinated human services, transit assist. I forget the exact name, but like everything else, like these things are, though, of course, the funding is way short of the demand. But you might want to, refer to that plan. Maybe there's some options for tapping into that.
Alderperson Hiley?
Alder Caravello might be able to give more detail on this, but I know the regional transit plan right now does have a future plan for a bus spur of Madison Metro down to Stoughton, and that's, in the fuzzy future time. So I think it's up to us to really advocate for that. We wanted to make it happen, and I think with more and more people realizing that our car culture is driving us off a cliff, we need to make it a priority, and no one will for us besides Stoughton.
Yeah, Sun Prairie recently signed an agreement with Metro to start running buses to Sun Prairie. Certainly, of course, Stoughton is farther away, but maybe it's not probably too early to at least start those conversations with Madison Metro as to, what would the conditions need to be to justify running buses out here.
Okay. Alderperson Caravello?
And to Alder Hiley's point about the fuzzy future, it is kind of a fuzzy future right now, definitely with, since there is no funding and there is no regional transportation authority at this point. So I think a lot of people recognize that some changes need to be made, and we need to move forward in that direction, and designating at least a park and ride spot here in Stoughton, and then moving forward with, optimally, I'd love to see commuter trains on actual rails would be great, since our train tracks go from Stoughton right through McFarland into Madison, and our neighbors to the west in Oregon have a rail line that goes from Oregon through Fitchburg into Madison that I believe goes right through the Alliant Energy Center. So I think money might be a concern to make all this happen, and money and will and some leadership at the state level to make things happen. But the fuzzy future is in front of us, so we'll see where we go.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, thank you. And
Attorney Dragney.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I just had one
Hiding
question.
back there.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm hiding over here behind the screen.
Yes.
So, thank you. This is the survey results.
Correct.
Is this like one step in the process leading to a plan that will be adopted, or has a plan already been adopted?
It's one step, and the steering committee itself is continuing to meet. We had an executive committee meeting earlier today to talk about what they're going to come up with, whether it's key action items or a vision statement. I don't think this group will come up with a plan. It's not any kind of official body, so they can be a champion, but they'd be doing a plan for somebody else. Now, the Regional Planning Commission, as I mentioned, will be using this as one of the bases for our regional land use plan. I know the Transportation Planning Board is looking at the survey results for the update of their transit development plan, which is ongoing currently. So we're also encouraging others to incorporate these results into their planning processes as well.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Yep. Appreciate you coming out tonight.
Thank you.
All right, the minutes and reports are in the packets. It takes us to our public comment period. So far, I have 3 people signed up to speak. The first one would be Denise Durancic at 324 Sherman Street. Good evening.
Good evening, folks. I'm here to give you a report on the Downtown Revitalization Subcommittee. I'm chair of that group, and before I get started, I just want to thank you for your vision in supporting this subcommittee and supporting it with money, especially after the article in the Hub last week that talks about the number of closures of shops on Main Street. So I think this comes at a very opportune time in our community. So I want to let you know that the committee has been meeting for several months now. We recommended to the RDA that we hire heirs as our consultant, and the RDA approved the contract last month. And next week, Tuesday, July 2nd, at 6 o'clock in the Hall of Fame room, we will be having our first meeting with the heirs consultants. And it will be a kickoff to the project, and so we will be looking at the defined area. We will be identifying planning and design goals and objectives for the area. We'll be discussing and reviewing ideas on public input meetings. We'll be identifying the project stakeholders, also reviewing the available kind of base information that they need, and establishing a project schedule. So we're going to have a pretty full meeting, and then everything will be based off of that meeting. But probably one of the first things that the committee members will be doing is working on arranging the stakeholder interviews, because there will be 8 separate stakeholder interviews, which information will be based on in the future. So I wanted to give you kind of an idea of what we're doing, where we're going. I will come back periodically and report. Obviously, you're more than welcome to come and sit in on the meetings. And also, I run kind of a looser meeting. So, other people who aren't on the committee who have feedback, as Jean knows, I let them participate. We have a good group of people, on the committee. They've shown up, most of them, unless they were stuck somewhere. So again, I just want to thank you for your support, and I will be back. And Tim, I can answer your question about regional planning, transportation at some point in the future if you want
I was hoping
to.
you're going to elucidate right now about who it is
Well,
that doesn't like it.
that's not
but-
part of my presentation, so, but if you want to give me a call, I was campaigning during a time that Dane County was looking at regional transit, and very interesting comments.
Thank you.
Denise,
Thank you.
what date was that meeting, your kickoff meeting again?
Pardon?
What date and time was your kickoff meeting
It's
again?
July 2nd. That's next Tuesday at 6 o'clock, and it's in the Hall of Fame room.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, I have Roger Springman, 812 Creedeman. And just to remind you, we do have the flashcards and the
Okay,
timer going.
I'll do my best. Hopefully, I'll come closer than last time. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, for this chance to get in front of you tonight and bring you up-to-date information on the RFEI of the RDA, that is the request for expressions of interest, and our work with developers. I wasn't here 2 weeks ago. I was in Michigan with my mom's 98th birthday, so I wasn't able to be here then. But what I wanted to let you know is that tomorrow night at 4:30, the RDA is holding a special proposers meeting for our developers in the fire training room. So if you're available tomorrow night and want to stop by and hear our developer, and I'll explain that momentarily, talk about their interest in our project and where they are at developing initial ideas, tomorrow night, 4:30, in the fire training room. It's a public meeting, and you're more than welcome to stop by and listen in. So you probably heard me say something here about developer. So going into today, we had 2 developers on our master developer list. At 3 o'clock today, we had 1. So, and the one that's remaining is Brink Development out of Madison. And I think a couple months ago, or maybe whenever it was here that I spoke last, I mentioned about some of their great work on East Washington Avenue, hotel. They've got a nightclub activity. They've got housing. So they're very diversified and very much able to do the work for Stoughton should we move in that direction. But Bear Development dropped out. And today, after I kind of got over that news and I had a chance to call Gary Becker, our consultant, we talked a bit, and we were confused because we had just spoke with them last Thursday for like 20 minutes. And we tried to allay, I mean, you could sense they were a little apprehensive or something was going on, but we really worked really hard to allay their concerns, tell them we have a lot of grants in flow, in process, in queue, and that the city has a major commitment to the project area. So we don't know if another project came along that was more inviting to them or whatever, but we're disappointed now. We just have 1 for tomorrow night at 4:30 in the fire training room. So that is what it is. We have to live with it for the moment, and so we'll see where the process takes us. When Gary and I did talk today, I will tell you that if we, and this is based on, and the mayor was at this meeting as well, and Jamin was there as well, as soon as we announced our initial master developers, within a couple weeks, Kurt Brink, who I don't know if anybody knows Kurt, very inviting, engaging older gentleman who's got a lot of development experience. He was here with some development plans already for the site. And I talked to him today and said, can you come at 4:30 tomorrow? And he said yes. So he's very committed to Stoughton, and he wants to work down here. So we're going to listen to him tomorrow night, and you're able to listen to him as well because this is an RFEI process. What we're going to do is the RDA needs responsibility to develop the relationship with Mr. Brink, and then what will happen is any of the audience members that are present will have a chance to fill out a comment form to ask him questions kind of after the fact, and we'll make sure that he gets all the comments that the audience, be it council members or the public, may wish to ask Mr. Brink and his team tomorrow night. So the other thing, we're going to be taping the meeting, so if you can't make it tomorrow night, there will be a tape. I think the WSTO is taping, I believe, Mayor, is that correct? So we are trying to give you a chance to also listen in if you cannot make it tomorrow night. So we are at a turning point. We're hoping we can get this all figured out by early fall, maybe even late August. But we begin tomorrow night with the interview of the Brink development team and see where we end up, and hope you can make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Am I close?
As close as you get. Okay, I have 4 people signed up. I believe they all want to speak regarding ordinance 21, which is item number 12. And the first one would be Glenn Dillard at 736 Berry Street.
Evening, Mayor, council members. We live at 736 Berry Street. Half of my backyard is easement, and I can't do anything with it. We back up to the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, and we have people cutting through our yard a lot. We have people who let their dogs go loose, and they run up in our yard and do their duty. And we wanted to put a fence up last year to stop that from happening. We talked to several different fencing companies to put a fence up in our backyard, and finally one said, you better check with the city of Stoughton because they have an ordinance against building on their on the easements. And in fact, you do, as what we're here for. It's very unfair ordinance. There aren't a lot of communities that have that ordinance where you can't build on a fence on an easement. My easement is mostly stormwater runoff, and then I have a cut through the center of the yard, which is utilities easement. The thing that is not fair is that I don't have the ability to do anything with my yard. I mean, we were gonna put a fence right on the edge of the easement. That wasn't allowed. And so we gave up trying to put a fence on. I understand that things have to be discussed, and I understand that it's not fair, and I understand that you have to look out for the people and homeowners with these easements. But I would say you should give us our due. Let us decide how to manage these easements. If we can build a fence on it, fine. If the utilities come through and they have to do some digging, maybe they can give a notice and we could take the fence down so they could do their work on the easement. But it's just not right to do that. So I am in favor of revoking that standard. I think the Stoughton utilities is kind of like the dog wagging, the tail wagging the dog, in that they're driving your easement and your trying to think of the name, ordinances. So I'm in favor of this resolution, and I would encourage it to be passed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next I have Michael and Marcia Berrigan are both here, and they're at 1509 West Milwaukee Street. You don't mind coming up together, do you?
No, I'm going aside.
All right, thank you.
Mike's like, put it in the middle. I don't know if you'll be able to hear us both. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. We live at 1509 West Milwaukee Street. We have 4 children. They're all boys. I'm a stay-at-home mom with all of them. We have 14-month-old twins. We have a 3-year-old and an 11-year-old. All boys. One has autism. So we live on a busy street on West Milwaukee Street, right at the bottom of the hill where all the cars speed down. We live right there. There's a field on one side of our house and in the back of our house. You might know it because we just had a big windstorm and all the electric poles fell on our house.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that.
We were on the news.
We were on the news. So in our yard, we have a 30-foot easement on one side. We have a 12-foot easement on the other side. That's what's preventing us from being able to build a fence. If we build it inside, that leaves us practically no yard, like not even enough for a play set. It's just, there's not enough space. It would come right up to the garage and within a few feet of the back of our house. So there's a lot of fast tractors that are working in the field. They come out there with no warning. Their crops come right up to the edge of our yard. Like I couldn't reach over and touch them. There's no barrier between our yard and the field, not at all. They literally come up to the edge. I don't know how fast they go, maybe 25, 30 miles an hour. They spray stuff. I don't know what it is. You can smell it. It's very strong. There's no warning when it's going to happen. What we're asking for is just to be able to put up some sort of barrier. We want to put a fence, and I need to be able to contain the kids. If one goes in the field, he could get lost in the corn, or even the winter wheat. Like, it's only this tall, and it's already taller than half of our kids. And we just need to be able to put this in there. But, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost.
Oh, no, it's okay. I think we understand that the city council doesn't have the ability to give us relief from the easements. All we're asking for is the freedom to work directly with the easement holders, utility companies, so that if we get permission, we can build a fence, then we don't have to go around a zoning ordinance. So that's it at the end of the day. We're not saying that you guys can, override the easement and say, go ahead and build your fence. We're just,
Right.
again, asking for that freedom to work directly with utility companies.
We're aware that there's still requirements that the utility companies would make us adhere to. Like, I'm well aware of there's a poles above our yard, nothing over 15 feet. Like, they've given, ATC holds one of the easements, they hold the 30-foot easement. They're allowing us to put the fence in, but this ordinance prevents that. So, with, this ordinance is, even if the utilities are okay with it, this specific ordinance doesn't allow it. It just puts a flat out no on everything. So we're just asking to work with them directly, and then they'll allow it when it makes sense.
And I think we talked before during I think it was the planning
Commission.
Planning Commission. Yeah, and I think one of the proposals there for the folks that weren't in that meeting was to include on the permit some language that says, just be aware that if there's an easement on your property, you may be restricted from putting up the fence. We think that's a good compromise, and that this ordinance should just be taken out of the zoning code. Thanks.
Thank you. Next would be Catherine Napier for 100 Ashbury Lane.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to come. I am Catherine Napier. I do live at 100 Ashbury Lane. If anybody has been over to the east side of town, you know exactly where my house is. I have the giant inflatable dragons every Halloween and winter. That is my yard. And I have a 40-foot easement from Main Street into the side of my yard, and I have a 15-foot from the back of our yard up to the back of our house. That literally allows us 3 feet off the side of our house. We can't even build a deck. We can put in the wooden stairs that we had. That is all the easement will allow us. I have 2 small children, and I live right on the raceway. Cars do not go 35 right there. I've tried putting up the bushes to contain my children. Thankfully, they are listening to that right now. But as they get older, who knows? I just want to be able to put up some kind of barrier, just like they do, to keep my children safe. I also watch a couple of children at my house. Again, I would like a barrier to be able to keep my children safe. It's not safe where they are right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
What's that? Well, we usually don't
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Bye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate the comments. Thank you.
catch her
I'm not
offline,
allowed to
maybe.
speak with you like right now.
Yeah, it's not really in our rules.
Yeah, sorry I blew up.
Does anybody else wish to speak at the public comment? Seeing none, we'll move into the agenda items. And the first item would be the consent agenda, and there's several things in there. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the
I
consent.
move for approval of the consent agenda, June 11, 2000.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion by Boersma and a second by Jensen. Would anybody like anything removed and acted upon separately? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I abstain from the vote.
Okay, none opposed, one abstention. Okay, thank you very much. I think what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is move ordinance 21 up and have that conversation first. I know there's people waiting here to hear the results of that. Does that sound okay? All right, we'll do that. And ordinance 21 of 2019 comes from the Planning Commission. Alderperson Caravello. So first reading.
This is the first reading of ordinance 21 of 2019, amending zoning code section 78-718, parentheses 3, parentheses I of the Stoughton Municipal Code, and the Plan Commission recommended approval 7-0. I so move.
Well, it's a first reading.
It's for first
Yeah, you don't have to move it.
And this came to Planning Commission a couple of weeks ago, and from what I understand, there has been some discussion that I have not been present at since that time, and so I may defer to either Attorney Dragney or Utilities Director Weiss to fill us in on current thinking.
I could just say a few things. We did have a meeting this morning. I was out last week. And actually, the first time I saw this ordinance was when I was at the Plan Commission meeting a couple of weeks ago. I wasn't really in the loop on it until that meeting. And I had some concerns about the ordinance as it was presented at that time, because the way the ordinance was presented was to modify it to say that, to continue the prohibition on fences and easements, but to include some language indicating that, that fences could be allowed if the affected utility approved it. So I had some concerns with that approach. Just from a zoning standpoint, it's not appropriate to have that kind of a structure where you allow people to get permission from some third party to do something that otherwise is not allowed under the zoning code. In any event, and my suggestion at the meeting was, well, perhaps, we could just take this out of the zoning code. After that meeting, I had some further discussions with staff, including Utilities Director Weiss, and we had a meeting this morning to talk about kind of how to understand the issues that are presented here, and I think it's a somewhat complicated set of questions that we have to work through. This morning, the conclusion at the staff level discussion this morning was that we'd like to recommend that this be something that is considered by the Public Works Committee and the Utilities Committee, possibly even at a joint meeting in July, where we could talk about what options are available and what makes the most sense to address this issue. One option that we talked about that still needs some work before we could really present it clearly to the committee and the council for consideration would be whether it would be possible to modify the ordinance to be a little bit more tailored in how we're defining these easement areas where this restriction applies. So, for example, you heard tonight, I think a couple of folks say, one person indicated that they were subject to a 30-foot easement, another, I think, said 40-foot easement. Those are easement areas that are on the large side. I think Stoughton Utilities typically needs, if you've got an easement down a rear lot line, for example, I think what we typically see for Stoughton Utilities is 6 feet on either side of the property line. And that's adequate to meet the needs of Stoughton Utilities. I guess we do have some cases where there are larger easements, 30 feet, 40 feet, and I'm not exactly sure what all the reasons are that lead to that result. One reason apparently is that if you've got like a high voltage transmission line like ATC line, they require a 30-foot easement. But our needs don't require necessarily a 30-foot easement. So what we talked about this morning is trying to get our hands around, well, what is needed from the standpoint of making sure that the utility easement can function as needed for the city's purposes and Stoughton Utilities' purposes? And is there a way to be a little more targeted in how this ordinance is modified, rather than just take it out entirely or create a process that doesn't seem to be workable? Is there a way to more narrowly define these easement areas where the restriction would apply that could then be considered and discussed, so that somebody who right now is subject to a 30-foot easement, maybe that could be reduced? So that was the discussion we had this morning. If the council agrees that it makes sense to have the committees look at that a little further before we try and take action on that, I think that would be a good idea.
Did you have anything you wanted to add? Otherwise, I'll open it up for questions.
I really don't. I think Matt did a great job capturing what we discussed.
Okay, so I saw Alderperson Riley.
Thank you. I'm curious, how long do you think that process might take, given the experience that these people are having right now? How long do we think it might take for us to review this, to perhaps fine-tune it in such a way that it addresses their concerns, and then also, of course, addresses any potential concerns of the utility? Any ideas?
So the discussion we had this morning was looking to schedule meetings with the Utilities Committee and Public Works. July 15 and 18 are the next scheduled meeting dates. We have to try and figure out what's workable that week for a meeting. I don't know if it's going to be a joint meeting or 2 meetings. And then the hope is that we could meet at a staff level before then to try and develop some language that makes sense for discussion at that meeting. If there's a consensus during that week on what would be workable, that could be then moved back to Plan Commission. I think Plan Commission has to take another look at this, just because it's a zoning ordinance amendment, and we do need a recommendation from Planning Commission before we can act on a zoning ordinance amendment. And I think what we'd be putting together here would be rather different from what they looked at a couple of weeks ago. So that, to me, suggests we're probably looking at, Plan Commission maybe in August, and council the second meeting in August. Late August would be maybe best case scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alderperson Boersma and then Hirsch.
Matt, I just have a question for you, and that is, these easements, who knows when they started, how they were implemented. What's the process to change an easement? Like if you were talking about potentially reducing the size of the easement, would that require a certified survey map? Would it require, like an agreement between owner and city, or owner and utilities, or what?
Yeah.
How would that process work?
So to answer the question, I want to make sure I provide a little more context. So what we have right now is we have two things at play at the same time. One is an easement, which is an interest in property that was conveyed by a property owner to the utilities. And then we have a zoning ordinance, which is a zoning regulation, which is different from the easement. So what I was talking about with respect to the zoning ordinance was not modifying the easement or the terms of the easement, but rather just changing how our zoning code describes what's allowed in an easement area, so that it's, instead of saying no fences within the entirety of any easement, trying to figure out if there's a way that it makes sense to narrow up where those restrictions would apply in easements that exist today, okay? And that wouldn't require any change to the easement itself. The easement would still be there. It would be unaffected. This would just change our zoning ordinance. That's the thought we have today. Is that kind of getting to your question?
That wasn't an answer to the question.
No,
The
so
question was,
how do you change the
an
easement?
easement once
Yeah.
it's in place? Because
Okay.
they are considered to be forever, I know that. But,
You got pipes running underneath them. There's.
well, it depends on what it is. I mean, one of the first gentleman that talked about the fact that it may have had something to do with stormwater.
So the easements, let me give you two different examples to give you, to answer the question. In one scenario, you could have an easement that is granted to a specific entity, where the entity that is the beneficiary of the easement is named and known and has the rights under the easement. That easement could be modified by reaching an agreement with whoever that entity is, on an instrument that would be recorded that would amend or modify the terms of that easement. So that would be one scenario. What we face here is somewhat more complicated, because in a municipality, many easements are created through, for example, the recording of plats or certified survey maps that simply include notations indicating the presence of utility easements without specifying who the holders of those easements are. And so, as a legal matter, any utility arguably has a claim to use that easement. That would include not only the city as the owner and operator of Stoughton Utilities and of its stormwater utility, but also other entities such as telecommunications providers, telephone companies, drawing a blank on other entities, but anyone that might arguably assert that it was intended to be a utility that had a right to use that easement. If you wanted to modify that easement, and this becomes a title issue for the property owner, let's say you wanted to terminate it, you'd have to be able, and you wanted a title company to not show that there was any easement there, you'd have to satisfy the title company that any utility that arguably had a right to use that easement area has signed off on a release or a modification of that easement. And that can be kind of a tall order for a property owner to go through, because they're going to have a fairly long list of entities that they may have to deal with. It's kind of a cumbersome process. So that's how I would answer that.
Thank you.
I'm at Alderperson Hirsch and then Hiley.
Hi, thank you. I guess I would like this be sent back to those two committees before going on to planning. just because I think there's a lot of things that still need to be worked out. As we were talking about in utilities meeting the other day, is that, sure, we'd love to be able to put up fences and, satisfy our community members, but what happens if we have another storm or something happens to what is in that utility easement in that person's yard that now has a fence? If there is a main break of sewage and you have basements filling up and there is a fence that's a barrier that's not allowing utilities to get in there to fix it quickly, how are we going to handle that? Are we going to, who's responsible for that? Are we able to tear down that fence as quick as possible to get at that? Because that's part of the utilities. Who's responsible, who's liable to then fix the fence? Is that going to be back on the city, which will be back on our taxpayers? There's all these different scenarios that we need to think about of how we're going to handle them. It's not just a quick, we're going to allow fences now. There's lots of problems that may arise by just saying we're not going to allow fences, because if we have all these incidences, not that there are because our utilities are great, but if they do occur, we need to have thought about what is our liability, what is the homeowner's liability. If the homeowner decides, one scenario might be if the homeowner decides to build a fence in an easement, the utility, if they need to get in there, can break down the fence and it's back on the homeowner to fix that fence. That's just one scenario. How are we going to address this? I think it's a little bit too simplistic right now, according to what the attorney says too. I think we need to spend a little bit more thoughtful time so we're not caught up in a bad situation and don't have any recourse because we didn't do our due diligence to think about all that needs to be done. Thank you.
Alderperson Hiley and then Riley.
Yeah, I agree. I think that possibly a joint meeting would be best to just have all the stakeholders in the same place. Based on what we said in the Utilities Committee, there are a lot of things that could go wrong, and that our utility being part of the city, or part of the city government, helps us, have a little bit more control over the fencing issues. And I'm glad that we had so much feedback from the community tonight to give us kind of a wide range of these cases where fences might be needed, to give an idea of the urgency of some of that need, so that we can try to find some sort of solution to these.
Thank you. Alderperson Riley.
Thank you, Mayor. Purely for the sake of discussion and thought here, would not a number of the concerns that are being addressed here be addressed by the language that was suggested by the Berrigans in their letter, stating that, with the exception being unless a written exception has been made by the affected utility to be determined on a case-by-case basis? Would that not address almost every concern, perhaps not quite as broad as Alderperson Hirsch's statements, but wouldn't qualifying language like that, just again, for the sake of discussion, address a lot of these concerns?
I guess
Go ahead.
the
Joe.
concern that I had internally with that, and I think we want to be, support the community and the needs that they have, is the subjective nature of that. Ultimately, on a case-by-case basis, we'd have to have internal criteria as far as what that looks like, and we feel that we can capture that in an ordinance modification to be able to make it not subjective, so it very clearly defines when we can have that, say, a fence here, and when we absolutely can't, for whatever reason that may be, but very specific criteria for them to work off of from the zoning department to be able to do that. And I think to the points that have been already made, on May 25th, we had that significant storm event that we had come through, and with the encumbrances of trees and fences and a variety of different things, it slows down our restoration process. So we want to be very careful before we eliminate this from the ordinance Again, I do recommend that we look at going back to committees and having that full discussion so that we can do the right thing for individual property owners, but also the community as a whole. So we look at planned restoration as well as emergency restoration, and we're able to do that for the best interest of everyone involved.
Go ahead, Matt.
And from a legal standpoint, I have a concern with that language, because essentially what it says is, you're not allowed to do this unless the utilities, and here, who is the utilities? It's the city of Stoughton. So you're not allowed to do this unless the city of Stoughton says you can do this. Completely outside the zoning framework that normally operates, which is if you want to do something that's not allowed by the zoning code, what the process is to get a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals and meeting the unnecessary hardship test. So that from the legal standpoint, it strikes me as inappropriate to set up a zoning restriction that says, here's the rule unless the city says you don't have to follow this rule. I think that's not an appropriate way to structure a zoning regulation.
Just quickly.
It's going to turn into a debate, or?
It may to a degree. I would, the affected utility doesn't necessarily reference only the city of Stoughton, right? ATC or whoever else they're dealing with. It references a lot of entities, does it not? And not just the city of Stoughton?
This particular ordinance applies only to easements intended to accommodate stormwater management, sewer, water, and electric. I suppose ATC would fit into the electric category, but at least one of the affected utilities is the city of Stoughton.
Right, I understand
The other concern is, even if the city of Stoughton had nothing to do with it, I think it would be inappropriate to say, in Stoughton, the zoning rule is this, unless some third-party utility says it's something different. And if somebody goes to that third-party utility and they get turned down, there's no legal standard to govern their decision. What's the appeal from that? It's just completely outside the zoning framework that exists in Wisconsin, where you have zoning rules. There are procedures for getting relief from those, but they are established procedures that involve the Zoning Board of Appeals, the unnecessary hardship test, or the conditional use permit process. So I have concerns with that kind of approach.
All right, thank you.
Alderperson Reeves?
Yeah, along the same lines, I think this actually could work against the homeowner, and it feels very arbitrary to me that you have to essentially go and, plead your case to the utility without any parameters. So I would agree that we need to send it back to committees to have something that makes sense, that's fair to everyone, including the homeowner and the people that have to access the utilities. So.
Okay, thank you. So, go ahead, Alderperson Schumacher.
With this issue, I believe that we should both observe due diligence and expedience with the concerns that the community members are raising, because they're effective for fences are really only effective in the summertime when the kids are outside. If this gets pushed out into fall toward winter, that's more of an irrelevant point then.
Okay. And I think that's a fair point, and that's one of the reasons why we called for an initial meeting this morning. Unfortunately, or fortunately for them, two of our leadership members are on vacation right now, so they couldn't attend. So we wanted to at least begin the discussion and not wait until they got back. And what we're looking for tonight was just direction on whether or not we wanted to bring this back as a second reading or take it back to the committees and try to do a little bit more work on it. I guess I'm hearing the latter, and I don't know if we need a motion to that effect. We're mostly looking for direction here. I think we have it.
I think it would help to have a motion to refer this to the Public Works and Utilities Committee.
I move that we refer it back to committees for public works and utilities, and that we have a joint meeting
Second.
to discuss
Okay.
it.
Second by...
By what date?
ASAP. I think we're looking at the dates that Matt mentioned that week, and you said that was July, I forget.
So the currently scheduled meeting dates, as I understand it, are the 15th for utilities and the 18th for public works. And so we were going to see if it was possible to combine them into a single meeting.
Right.
And we can reach out and see if the 18th would work with our committee as a starting place.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Again, Just quickly, and I think as council suggested that from there it would have to then go to the planning commission again, am I correct, council? Was that your thought?
If what comes out of that committee meeting is something very different from what the plan commission has considered and made a recommendation on, then I think yes.
And just out of curiosity, how long would it take for the planning commission to be able to address that? If we know.
Planning commission meets, what is it? Would be the second, is it the second Monday, and it would be in August 12th.
And is there any, and I don't know the answer to this question, I'll ask it. Is there any way that one might be able to endeavor to schedule that planning commission meeting sooner to the 15th, 18th, or
We could
whatever?
certainly try to do that if we feel that it's ready for prime time. That would be our goal, is
Thank you.
certainly.
So the question is, do we have a specific meeting for Public Works and Utilities? Is it going to be on Utilities date, or is it going to be on Public Works, or?
I think Jill's going to help coordinate that.
Yeah, we'll try to make it on the 18th, which is actually the date of Public Works, but I need to reach out to my committee, to the Utility Committee, and see if they're able to move their meeting to the 18th.
And those are public meetings, so people can certainly attend. And once we post it, we'll post the site. Typically, the meetings are held in the Hall of Fame room.
Which meeting's first, Jill?
The Utilities Committee meeting is actually on the 15th,
Okay.
and the Public Works is on the 18th, but we'll see with our committee and see if it's possible to move the Utilities meeting to the 18th.
Okay.
Because we'd have to have a quorum for both groups, so we want to make sure that the date works out. But we wanted to come here first and see if that was the direction you wanted us to go before we start sending out doodle polls. So that's kind of where we're at. Anybody have any? Go ahead, Alderperson Legaki.
Reading through the Berrigan's letters and knowing childcare issues and all, and knowing that this is now in question. If these families wanted to try to do safety things for their children, knowing that this is under debate, being looked at, most likely not going to get done during these warm months where children are home right now, are there any options for them as this is churning through our system? Do they have people they can go to, given that this is now in question? I don't know, but I think the question should be asked.
Do you mean, like, can they put up a fence in the meantime?
Temporary.
I'm just wondering, are there city people that they can still remain legal and not breaking these easement safety restrictions, but yet figure out what they can do? I don't know what that looks like.
Well, it doesn't look like putting up a fence. So I'm not sure what other options they may have to deal with the safety issues, but.
If somebody comes up with something, we'd be certainly open to having the conversation, but off the top of my head, I don't know what that would be. But certainly a concern. Alderperson Hirsch?
Well, along with Alder
Legaki.
Sorry.
It's a good Polish name.
Could they put up like a snow fence, a temporary fence? I mean, I think that probably suffice at this point.
Not in a way that would conform to the current zoning ordinance, and potentially not in a way that would conform to the existing easement.
Okay. Even if it's temporary. All right. Tried, Gene.
Okay, so I guess we have a motion on the table. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. We'll shoot out the dates to you.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in. That takes us to old business. Ordinance 20 of 2019 is up for a second reading. That comes from the Planning Commission. Alderperson Caravello.
Let me get, okay. Let me get my things in order here. 20. There you go. It's not Kettle Park West.
It's 2019,
Kettle
right?
Park
Yeah.
West. Okay,
very
an
long.
ordinance amending the, amending the zoning classification of certain lands located west of US Highway 51 and north of State
Okay.
Highway 138 in the city of Stoughton from RH, rural holding, to SR5, single-family residential, and I institutional. And I so move.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Alderperson Bartlett. And just a note, in the packet, the resolution, it should say that it was approved 6-0 from the Planning Commission. It just says 0. So we'll note that correction. Alderperson Caravello, or do you want to walk us through this? Otherwise, we have developers here.
It's just more with moving forward with the development of Kettle Park West and changing the classification of those lands. If there's anybody has any particular questions, the developers are here.
Okay, so this is on for a second reading. Are there any questions on the ordinance? It should be fairly self-explanatory. I know there's a lot in there.
That's good.
Hearing no questions, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Item number 6 is a discussion and possible action regarding a contract with Slipstream Services related to OEI Municipal Energy Project. And on this one, I'm not sure if Attorney Dregney had time to review it. He was gone last week. But we do have Corey Neely here. He's going to walk us through this agreement. And if nothing else tonight, what we'd like to do is to consider appointing Corey as the contractor to represent Stoughton in the contract. And if we're not comfortable on voting on the contract tonight, we'll bring the actual completed version to the next meeting. Does that sound okay? All right, go ahead, Corey.
For those of you that kind of were here the night that I talked about the grant and asked for approval in applying for that grant, this grant was delivered from the Office of Energy Innovation, State Energy Office, basically to study our energy use as part of a 7-city Dane County group. The reason why they kind of talked to us is we were part of a 25 by 25 pledge back in 2008 as part of the state climate action group, and we were really unaware of that until that point, and at least I was at the utility because that was before my time. But the goal is to look at our energy use as a city, and what we specifically wrote into the contract as our focus was to look at renewable energy for city facilities and to look at electrifying transportation, so putting in car chargers and trying to find the best locations for that. As part of that grant, we would get money to reimburse for city staff labor in getting information on building energy use, fleet energy use, so how we fuel our vehicles, a list of energy-related projects. All this information we're gathering at the city level. Now, I work for the utility as part of a WPPI energy services rep, and so my time is essentially free to the city, but everyone else within the city is able to bill their hours and request reimbursement for those hours that they spend working on this. So I guess the goal for me is that we would agree to do this, but also with the mindset that this is formulating a plan towards the future, and really, the city taking that first step and being serious about, looking at our energy usage on a building by building basis, monitoring and looking at the usage over time, and then, the great part of this is we're able to compare our building energy usage with other cities within this group. So We can look at the library in Monona and say, how does that compare to our energy use index for the library in Stoughton? You know, per square foot, we're better or worse than them, and why is that? And you know, we can look at all the different facilities that we have that are similar to those and get that access to data where, you know, we wouldn't normally have that before. You know, the other thing would be developing sustainability goals. You know, a lot of the other communities such as Fitchburg or, you know, Monona have very aggressive carbon-free future goals that they have. You know, we can have access to those plans and look at, you know, where they're going and kind of decide what is the best way to go. And it's speeding up the process of learning by using other communities, you know, as an example. So, you know, I guess the mayor requested that I be the contractor on that. You know, I'm fine with that being the case. We'll definitely still bill from city staff's time, and there's a method and mechanism for that in the documents that Attorney Dregney got. But I guess I don't really have anything else than that. I mean, if you have any questions about it.
Alderperson Hirsch.
Thanks, Corey. I think this is great. I'm glad you guys got it. I know we got, some of our funding was cut, but can you, because there's a lot of new alders here, could you talk about how long this project is, and is there a cap on the amount of money that Stoughton can use for staff? I mean,
Yes.
I mean, to make sure that we stay within the budget for the work that needs to be done and how that's going to be handled, and also what is the timeline, because it's a very exciting project, and obviously I'd like a short time around, but.
Yeah, a lot of the work's already been kind of done. You know, I have been working with other city staff, and it's a matter of kind of taking that out and pulling out those hours for those staff members to see, you know, kind of, you know, ask for reimbursement. The cap is $3,300 and $3,312, so $3,312 total. They're asking for a minimum match of $2,600 worth of in-kind services. So we could claim my time as that if we would like. Really, the goal here is to make sure that we're getting a good plan, we're getting all the information in there so that we're getting out of it what we're putting in. They've kind of split it up amongst all the communities, and the money, a lot of the money will actually go to the administrator in developing the document that will come out of all this. So when they initially asked for those funds, we'd asked for over $400,000. They cut it in half. And so what that meant is we had to kind of scramble and figure out, okay, well, if the grant administrator isn't going to be doing all this extra work, they're going to cut their work in half, then we have to pony up and give a little bit more work on our end. And I said, well, I'm the energy services rep for this town. I'd be willing to, you know, do everything for free because, I mean, it's part of my job anyway. So, you know, I feel like it'd be pretty easy and straightforward to be able to get that that grant dollar kind of matched and get to the $3,300 that we would request.
And it should be wrapped up when?
Oh, it'd be wrapped up at the end of the year. So I think it's December 31st.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a number of meetings in a few different places throughout the process, and I got involved initially during the interim after Bob retired and before Jill came on board, so I figured I would help support Corey and get to this point, and then at this point he might as well finish it off, and then we anticipate there'll be future opportunities, and then when that occurs, we're hoping that Jill will begin to participate in them going forward. Go ahead, Alderperson Schumacher.
Just as a general question, anybody can feel free to answer this one. Within the city, are there any green certified buildings?
Green certified, like as in LEED?
Yeah.
Or, that's a good question. I don't know there is any that sought a LEED certification. We do, in the school district, we do look at the Energy Star ratings of them. And that's something that will be a part of this as well, as every one of our city buildings that we chose to look at will be a part of Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So going forward, we can track their energy use and measure it that way.
I know some of the school buildings are close, but.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that any of those would qualify for LEED nowadays, but, you know, that's part of this as well is, you know, some of these cities are looking at saying, as part of a TIF, in Middleton, they talked about, hey, we would want you to have either solar ready or solar on your new facilities, and that's kind of a condition for, agreeing to move forward on a project. And these are all things that, we're kind of learning from each other. There was a lot that, our experience with the utility could kind of lend to the other cities that don't necessarily have a good relationship, or maybe just don't have a working relationship with their local utility. We talked about some of the things that, that might not make sense, and, you really don't have the ability to do that. So, it's a good collaborative environment, but, I think we're learning a lot from some of the Madison area, or more closer to Madison communities that have a little more money to spend on these types of things. So tax base is huge when it comes to making these designations and saying we're going to build a green LEED building.
What we hear when we go to these conferences, that a lot of the buildings are incorporating the designs of the LEED. Not all of them want to go through the certification process because there is a cost to it, but they still want to incorporate, those ideals into their projects. And certainly, these types of grants help us support the businesses that want to do that, and ourselves as well in our buildings. And I think that's what the focus of this is to try to, focus on things that we can do, and kind of help set the example and be a leader in the community.
There'll be a list of recommendations that come out part of this and say, okay, this is where we could improve, this is, what we could do in our community. And we've got a lot of room to go as far as LED lighting goes, building HVAC envelope, stuff like that. There's a lot to do. We'll have that list. The question is funding always, are we going to fund those renovations, and are we going to, make a priority to say this is what we're going to do? The utility itself has purchased and offset a lot of their energy use with renewable energy blocks, and so that's something like a lot of these cities are doing to try and make that 100% goal, because there's not enough roof to put solar and offset 100% of our usage at a city level. We made some good strides with the Public Works facility in offsetting their usage. And I think, using the new construction and design assistance program through WPPI for that, got us some extra funding, and we did a really good job with that. But we're looking at other facilities and trying to find out where else we could put it in city buildings. It's just not going to be enough to go to a higher level of renewable energy.
Does this also engage some of the commercial and industrial buildings in that, to partner with any of those, or?
Right. Well, we're just looking at the city's usage at this point.
Right. I know this is just the initial part.
Yeah, and that's part of my job, is engaging those folks and trying to help them with energy efficiency projects. If they come to me with a renewable energy project, I help them evaluate it and make sure that, hey, these numbers are right, or maybe they're not. However we can help them. So.
And we'll be looking at things like when we're redoing city municipal parking lots. At that point, when it's all dug up, put the infrastructure in. So if you want to do electric vehicles, for example, that the conduit will be there, and all we have to do is run the station. Then we can apply for the grant for the actual charger. So we're trying to, use these grants in order to educate ourselves and then get our ducks in a row. So when the time comes, we have a plan.
Yeah, we may not get as much out of this grant as some of the other communities would, because we already have a lot of these programs in place, through WPPI, either the RFP for renewable energy project, which we use on Nordic Ridge, or some of the other stuff that we've been able to get access to energy efficiency, money. But the other communities may also have other benefits that we could learn from. And I know that Monona has kind of really pushed a lot of the envelope when it comes to alternative fuel vehicles within their community. And we actually got to learn a little bit about, how some of the things didn't work out as planned, and those early adopters have a lot of stories to tell, and a lot of stuff to learn from those. So,
as an anecdote, I had seen, I know they have them in downtown Madison and a couple of the parking lots, but I was in Atlanta and had seen some of their downtown parking lots will have surface parking, but they'll also have trees of their solar panels, and you can plug into those. And I just thought it was a smart use of the space that you're going to have covered anyway.
Yeah. Other than that, that's about all I have for you. You know, if you have any other questions, I'm always available as part of the utility, so.
So I guess what I'm looking for tonight is direction or a motion to appoint Corey as our contractor in the contract, and then we can bring the entire contract back at the next council meeting for approval. Alderperson Hirsch?
I'll make that motion to
Second.
make Corey the contractor for this contract.
Okay, who was the second? Hiley? Okay. Any
you,
more
Corey.
conversation?
Thank you.
Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries, thank you. R94, 2019, comes from Utilities Committee, Alderperson Hirsch.
Sure. R 94, 2019, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to approve Stoughton Utilities 2018 wastewater treatment facility and sanitary sewer collection system compliance, maintenance, and report. And I so move.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Riley, Alderperson Hirsch.
I'm going to let Jill speak to this.
Very good, thank you. So basically, this is in many ways a report card, but it's a wonderful tool because it really evaluates all aspects of the wastewater treatment plant as well as our collection system. And really the reason for this, and the reason even publicly that we're going through this process to have this report approved and sent to DNR is that we are truly aware of where we're going, how things are today, but also looking at our deficiencies so we can plan for those accordingly. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of all the parameters here. We did ultimately get 7 A's because it truly is report card like. We did get 1 C and we did get 1 D. I'm going to start with a D. Unfortunately, we actually recently were audited by DNR, and that's when we recognized that we had this deficiency, and it really stems from we contract with a hauler to take our biosolids out and spread them on the fields. Through that process, they actually do a calculation of how much phosphorus, what load, what quantity of these biosolids are actually applied. In that calculation, they made a mistake, and so we actually over-applied those biosolids to a couple fields. DNR actually recognized this, and so through that audit process, ultimately, as much as that was a contractor mistake, it's ultimately our responsibility to review those documents and ensure that they are correct. It's great awareness for us, actually, so we're much more diligent and actually have set some additional processes in place to make sure that we're triple checking those calculations so that does not happen in the future. The also really good thing about this is I don't anticipate this being an ongoing issue. It hasn't been a previous issue. It's not something that we're going to be moving forward. It's an isolated one-time issue, even so much as in the DNR audit, we really didn't get cited for it. They didn't come back with anything substantial. They recognized that it was a mistake and that we had put in parameters to be able to avoid that from happening in the future. The next item where we got a C was basically what comes into the plant. Ultimately, the strength of that waste, but particularly the fact that we have a lot of clear water. We have a lot of clean water that comes into the plant, and that really comes from a couple different things. One, it can be sump pumps illegally connected to the collection system itself. It can also be ionized. The pipes themselves, the clay in particular, they can be cracked, the joints can separate, and then you have clear water, groundwater basically coming into the plant. The concern here is that we're treating all that water. If we can keep that water out, that's additional wear and tear on the entire system. It's additional cost for treating that clear water, so we want to keep that out. So that's just something to look at for the future, to do more capital improvements where we have the opportunities to remove those clay pipes, to continue through our cross-connection inspection. We actually review all sump pump connections, and again, public awareness. The more we can get out and let the public know if you've got clear water, make sure you're not illegally connecting it to our sanitary sewer system. In the other categories, though, we got A's. There's actually 3 parameters that are very specific to the treatment plant itself and how well it treats. Phosphorus, total suspended solids, and biological oxygen demand. And what that ultimately means is the strength of the waste. So as the bugs or microbes basically work on that waste, the higher strength that waste is, the larger that biological oxygen demand is. So look at our effluent. What is the quality of that we discharge? And in all of those cases, we received an A. So we're very much in compliance, and the wastewater treatment plant is very effective. The next item here is staffing and preventive maintenance. And that's one thing I have to say is this report really looks at all of our operations and everything that we're doing. It really looks at our record keeping and how we're, operating day to day. Again, we got an A there. Operator certification and education. That actually looks at the education, the staffing levels that we have, to ensure that basically we've got certified operators, and then what's our succession planning as we look to the future that we have operators in place. We got an A on that. Our financial management on actually how we operate, so that looks like cash on hand, our technology, things like SCADA and how we're managing the plant itself, and then energy management. We received an A there. And then on our maintenance of the collection system itself, we maintain it properly, we clean the pipes, we inspect them regularly, and we received an A for that parameter as well. So overall, from a standpoint as far as a report card, we got a 3.34, and anything above a 3, basically there's no additional action that the DNR is looking for us to do. Any questions? Yes.
Got one. When you're doing your solids monitoring, I know this is a great topic to talk about. In solids monitoring, are you doing continuous monitoring, or are you required to do continuous monitoring or periodic?
As far as the biosolids themselves, are the biosolids or the effluent basically that ultimately goes to the river?
I would guess both.
Okay. From what goes to discharge to the river is that basically daily. We have daily record keeping. We have to test that daily to know what we're at there.
That carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus monitoring?
Phosphorus, total suspended solids, biological oxygen demand is some of the main ones. We also have to look at parasites to see, kind of what might be discharged out there. We actually have in the summer, because the river quality is considered to be recreational, we actually disinfect that water that leaves the plant with UV. So we have to ensure that there's no parasites or anything that's in that water that leaves our plant. From a solid standpoint, that's ultimately stored, and it's certain times of the year, particularly in line with what the farmers can handle, is that those will be hauled out and then applied to the field. They are tested. The fields are actually tested. So between those two, then we say, okay, we determine exactly what application can be placed on those fields, and that's where we actually got that deficiency that I spoke of before.
Have we ever done any sort of pharmaceutical or byproduct monitoring on effluent?
We haven't at this point in time, but I suspect highly that's coming. I believe it will ultimately probably come on the water side first, and possibly then on the wastewater side, but they could come in tandem. I believe very much that will be, because I think that's a huge threat that we have out there right now, and looking at how to monitor that and really manage that effectively. But I do believe that in time, those requirements will be coming as well.
Send water samples to my lab.
Alderperson Boersma.
Thanks. Jill, if you could tell us that you had there was a problem, and then you had to remediate that then, or not?
Or not. In that case, ultimately that field will still be in play. So as much as we may have over-applied that year at those sites, we'll actually a soil sample again. So we will have then that new data. If in the end they find that, yep, the soil's high in phosphorus, then we'll possibly not apply at that field and let basically the crops uplift that, or we'll be applying at a much reduced rate because of that phosphorus being there.
So we didn't have to do anything with that field then?
We did not.
And then the second thing is, what happens if you fall below the 3? You get a slap on the wrist then, or?
No real slap on the wrist as much as, I think if you significantly fell below the 3, they would really be much more concerned. But ultimately, they have an action plan. So if we fell below 3, the DNR is looking for us to have an action plan in place ultimately, so how will we address those deficiencies?
So we weren't real close to that?
Not at all, because typically I would say that the parameter that we usually have a deficiency on is really that inflow. So basically the amount of clear water that we have coming into the plant. We also have some opportunities, I would say, with the work with industry. A lot of our industries do pre-treat, and some of the strength of that waste at times comes in its high strength. We have some additional opportunity there to be able to work with some of those entities that we're getting that more high strength waste from.
And how do you figure out that people are dumping water into the system, clear water?
Well, a couple things. One, when we inspect our pipes, so as we televise our pipes, there's one that we recently televised, and the joints, particularly in clay pipe, there's a variety of things that kind of happen with clay pipe, but One of which is the joints, they're soldered joints, and so over time that will go away. And so every 2 feet, you'll have a source or an opportunity basically for water to dump into that pipe. And so as we televise that, we'll jet that pipe, and then we'll televise it, and we can see that water actually flowing into the pipe.
And you can monitor that on individual homes and business?
We can't monitor in individual homes, but we can kind of get a gauge as far as how much it is just by the volume that's in the pipe and kind of get an idea. But it's kind of just an ongoing awareness of inspecting those pipes and ensuring that we're taking care of them as we can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
So we have a motion on the table, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. And item number 8 is R95 of 2019, and this comes from the Planning Commission, Alderperson Caravello.
R95 of 2019, a resolution by the Common Council of the City of Stoughton conditionally approving the preliminary plat for Stoughton Hospital, and Planning Commission approved 6-0, and I so move.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Riley. Alderperson Caravello, you want to try to explain this one, or?
Well, it's, Stoughton Hospital came to us wanting to designate their structures, their 3 structures I guess we think of as the Stoughton Hospital, as Stoughton Hospital condominium for purposes of financing. What the advantages to that, or why that designation, that might be something that, I don't know if Attorney Drainey can enlighten us on, because I'm not 100% clear on it, but.
I can't enlighten you much. I can tell you that to create a condominium, they do need approval of a condominium plat. But what the benefits are from their standpoint, in terms of how that facilitates their financing, I really don't know.
Any, Alderperson Johnson?
Attorney Dragney, do you see a downside for the city?
No, this has been vetted, I think, through the Planning Department and by the Plan Commission, and so I don't see any downside to the city.
Any other questions? Alderperson Legacki.
Just to clarify that this is for financial reasons and on paper and potential financial gain as opposed to potential change of status for building, or construction. This is just for financial purposes, and it's a designate. It's really not meant to be, as a human person would think, a condominium potential ideas. It's meant to be a very basic question. I just try to rule out.
That's my understanding, is for refinancing, they were unable to do I think it was a certified survey map, so this was kind of the alternative way for them to satisfy the lending institution, is my understanding. It seems like a creative way of doing that, but it really doesn't affect the way they conduct business or anything that affects the way, we work with them. So, when I went through Planning Commission, nobody really had any issues with it. Alderperson Caravello.
At planning, I think I asked a very general question, is if it really changes anything as far as what we know as Stoughton Hospital, and the response was no. So I think it's just having something to do with their mortgaging or refinancing.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. All right, the next 3 items are in relationship to Kettle Park West. R96 of 2019 is the first one. Alderperson Caravello.
R96 of 2019, resolution by the Common Council of the City of Stoughton conditionally approving the final plat of Kettle Park West North Addition. Plan Commission recommended approval 6-0. And again, this is with the north addition of the Kettle Park Kettle Park West.
All right, is that a motion?
Yes, I so move.
Second.
And a second by Alderperson Riley. Anything else you want to add? So, you've probably seen a million maps, but basically, and the developers are here if you have specific questions, the northern section of it really hasn't changed that much. And really, they're looking at, getting that final plat done in the northern section. That's the area that did not need to be rezoned, did not need to go through the comp plan amendment, so they're just looking for final plat approval on that. Hopefully I captured that correctly. Okay, I'm seeing them nodding. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. And then R97 of 2019, Alderperson Caravello.
R97 of 2019, resolution by the Common Council of the City of Stoughton conditionally approving a certified survey map associated with the Kettle Park West. And I so move.
Second.
And a second by Alderperson Riley. You want to cover this one?
There again, just moving forward with that northern section of the development of Kettle Park West.
Anything you want to add, Matt? I know Rodney's not here tonight, but
No. The conditions of approval that were built into these resolutions were developed at the staff level, I think reviewed by the Plan Commission. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about them, but I think we've addressed all of the technical and substantive issues that need to be addressed.
okay. Anybody, Alderperson?
This one,
Was there a previous certified survey map for this whole section then? Or is this all new?
Come on up, Dennis.
It's a new certified survey map, and I'm trying to see if I have a copy of it with me here. I think it's part of the resolution.
This is essentially the Kettle, right?
Yeah, it's the Kettle, the right-of-way that's going to go down to 138 ultimately, and I think there's one outlot extension for
Outlot
the,
two? Or
for the
three?
stormwater.
Yeah,
treatment.
two. Yep.
Yeah.
So I was curious, with that, I thought that whole section was certified, surveyed
No,
in the past.
no, it's we've never surveyed anything west of the commercial center.
Okay. That was my question, thank you.
Alderperson Hirsch, did you have something?
no, I just wanted to clarify that this resolution was for the Kettle, not for the northern part, so I just
Right.
wanted to clarify that.
It is. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this one? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. R98 of 2019, Alderperson Caravello.
R98 of 2019, a resolution to accept the proposed comprehensive plan amendment documents and set a public hearing date. Plan Commission recommended approval 7-0, and I so move.
Second.
And second by Riley, and I believe the date was August 13th, which is a council night, so we would do the public hearing as part of that. Anything you want to add to that?
I think that about covers it. Hopefully if anybody has any input or thoughts, they will submit them to us or come and share them with us.
And I think the public hearing is required by state statute because we are changing the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan we do every 10 years by state law. And we had an initial plan for this part of the development, and it's been reworked. You've probably seen the maps. And it's mostly the area that originally were the multi-use multi-use apartments, and they've been converted to single-family homes with the access road in between them, and then also moving the park from the original area was kind of in the middle of the development to kind of the westerly edge of that to create a more linear type of park with some woods there. So basically, in order for them to be consistent with the comp plan, we had to amend it and make these changes as part of the comp plan amendment so we can move forward with this. Are there any questions or comments? Hopefully I captured that accurately. Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Let's see, item 12 we already did. 13, R99 of 2019. This one comes from Finance. Alderperson Schumacher.
R99, 2019, resolution of the Common Council approving a financial agreement between the state of Wisconsin and the city of Stoughton for costs of road improvements to U.S. Highway 51 from Page Street to Hole Avenue, currently scheduled to be constructed in 2020. So we'll move that.
Second.
Motion and a second by Alderperson Riley. Anything else you want to cover on that one?
Just this one supersedes the previous agreement when it was utilities didn't need to replace a main in there, so that incurred a little bit additional cost into the city for this planned reconstruction. And I think that was all I had in my notes about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good deal, like a 75-25 split on the cost for that replacement.
Okay, thank you. Anything, Jill or Jamin, you want to add to this one? No? Okay. All right, any questions from anyone? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Item 14, discussion and action regarding engaging Ehlers and Associates as a municipal advisor. This comes from Finance as well, Alderperson Schumacher.
So this was, I don't know if you looked at the breakdown of the two different cost structures between Ehlers and Baker Tilly. So it was, we wanted to get them kind of separated a little bit. So Baker Tilly still remains our auditing firm, but Ehlers would be the municipal advisory portion, replacing Baker Tilly in there. It was a little bit more, but in the documentation you can see they've got better local representation for us, and maybe with that a little bit better responsiveness to things that we may need.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion in a second.
Yeah.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
What's that?
Yeah, I'd make a motion to authorize the Director of Finance to sign the agreement with Ehlers and Associates.
Okay, and who wants to second it?
I'll second it, doggone
Okay.
it.
Anything you want to add,
Yeah,
Greg?
roll.
Okay.
You know,
And
it's a
basically,
good thing to do.
when we restructured the finance department, and Jamin and I kind of had some of our initial conversations, and we're talking about our financial advisors, I encouraged him to, you know, work with the financial advising company that he was most comfortable with. So having said that, Jamin kind of reviewed the situation we were in and then kind of took it from there, and this is what we came up with.
Yeah, and I think if Joe Murray had never left, I don't think we'd be making this change, but since Dave Ferris is at Ehlers and Joe Murray is there now, just from a relationship standpoint, a service standpoint, I think this makes the most sense. Pay a little bit of a premium on the debt issuance cost, but the annual fees in terms of continuing disclosure is actually less, so I think it's the right thing to do.
Alderperson Johnson?
The other comment was is that there's no local representation. With Ehlers, we have local representation.
Right. Our actual representative that's been assigned to us is actually out of Kansas City right now. The closest representative from an MA side for Baker Tilly is St. Paul. So it just makes sense. I think they're in some transition with the merger with Baker Tilly. We've had no follow-up from them. Some of my emails have gone, no responses to them. So
we've already been working with Ellers a little bit, just on some TIF review and things like that. They've been very responsive. I'm very comfortable with Dave Ferris and Joe Murray, so.
Alderperson Hirsch?
You said that there's just a little bit difference. This has all been budgeted in for the year, and so.
The only actual cost that we would budget for on an annual basis is actually the continuing disclosure piece, which is actually the piece that's cheaper than what Springstead or Baker Tilly was paying. The rest of it is actually budgeted through the debt issuance process. And to be honest, it's almost impossible to budget all of the associated costs with the debt issuance, so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? And I would add, at one point, Dave Ferris was an interim finance person for us in between, I think it was in between Laura and Tammy. He was here for a time, so he's familiar with Stoughton as well. And then with Joe moving over there, at some point, he may be able to represent us. So I think that between the two of them, they have some pretty good history of Stoughton.
Yeah, it'll be a year before you see Joe in front of us, but he'll still be a resource for Dave to work with, so.
Any other questions or comments? Hear none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed? Item 15, discussion and action regarding revised CIP budget. Comes from finance.
So the CIP was a little bit more complicated than previously thought, and we'll have to make some adjustments to the calendar that we looked at prior to that. Jamin's got a better idea on what the scope of all the work involved is with that.
Yeah, so I don't think it's any secret the city is actually very busy right now with a number of different projects. Honestly, I think the original timeline was a little unrealistic to begin with, even if you didn't take into account the riverfront development, some of the Whitewater Park costs, things like that. I started off using past schedules, not knowing how much work was going to be entailed between when I received the information to compile it to actually be able to do an analysis. We found that a number of the streets and utilities projects related to the riverfront development were out to 2022, but that development looks like it may be going at a faster pace than we first anticipated, so we need to start moving some of those costs up in the CIP budget. There's some costs associated with the Whitewater Park, riverfront restoration, Riverwalk, pedestrian bridge that actually may need to be moved back now. So we just have a lot of moving parts right now within the city and all the projects that are going on. I just didn't think it would be fair to bring this to the CIP Budget Committee this Thursday already without really having any time to work with leadership and kind of work some things out in terms of where we really want to see the CIP go. So I think in the email I laid out, we tentatively want to move the first meeting to July 25th, the second meeting to August 22nd. I did throw in a third one if we do actually need it, with final approval coming at the September 24th council meeting.
Can you go over those dates again? So they're not the ones that are on here.
Nope, this is the one in the packet is the old one. Yeah, the one in the packet is the old one. I'll send this out too if everybody's okay with the timing of it. But the first CIP committee meeting would be July 25th, which is a Thursday. The second CIP meeting would be August 22nd. And then the third one, if needed, hopefully not, would be September 5th. And then final council approval on September 24th.
Alderperson Jensen?
Yeah, want a motion to?
Sure.
Okay. Make a motion then to accept the revised CIP budget schedule.
Second.
I think I heard Hiley. Any more discussion?
That was me, right?
Did I miss somebody over there?
I guess I sound like.
It was the same time.
Oh, it was the same time?
Oh, okay.
I
Okay,
can't give it
explains
each
then.
half of you.
I thought it
Okay.
sounded like him.
All in favor of the revised schedule, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. R100, the 2019, 100 resolutions already? Seems like a lot. That comes from CACP, Alderperson Lagaki.
This is Resolution 100 of 2019, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to adopt a social media policy. After lots of good discussion, this was approved at CACP 4-0. I move this resolution forward.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Hiley. Anything you want to elaborate on tonight?
Went to leadership teams and department heads. I think that this has been vetted pretty closely, and it appears to give people enough resources from our IT and enough to build and become responsible for their social media. It's going to be very interesting how all this looks in the future.
Alderperson Boersma?
I have a question, Gene. Who wrote this?
I inherited this, and I referred to Lisa Reeves, who probably would know more information about who wrote things.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Our newly anointed expert at social media had something to do with it over here, Attorney Dragney and his firm. Did you actually draft it?
I did. Well, and of course, I had policies from other communities that I looked at and borrowed to some extent.
It is very extensive and I think very well written.
Yeah. And I think there was a lot of input from staff and from alders over 2 sessions. I mean, this took over a year, and we really tried to fine tune it, and I don't know if it'll be perfect, but at least we can go forward on it. We have an implementation plan at leadership. We have the archiving company set up, so we're ready to move forward this thing. I understand we currently have 13 social media accounts, so we're going to be working on whether or not we're going to consolidate some of them and when we implement the new rules here. So now at least we have some rules that we can abide by and be in compliance.
I was just going to congratulate the writer, and I hereby do congratulate them.
I would say, I think the city of Stoughton now with this policy is on the leading edge of what's happening nationwide on this issue. I did just receive an email from the International Municipal Lawyers Association late last week with a model policy they developed, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet, but so
Might be yours.
Maybe they're borrowing, I don't know, but I will look at it when I have a few minutes and just kind of curious to see what they did, but it's a complicated, I think this is a complicated area for a lot of reasons. There are First Amendment issues, there are record retention issues, it's just a question of managing this. And there was a lot of input from staff and your leadership team on how to make this work. We'll see how it works now. The burden is really on department heads to manage these social media platforms that the city wants to use and figure out whether to use them, how to use them, and who's in charge of them.
Alderperson Riley?
Thank you. I know there is language in here that I'm having a hard time finding right now with respect to, I think, various department heads being responsible for monitoring that. Do we have any notion as to what type of time that will consume, what level of responsibility that imposes upon them? And by monitoring it, are we rendering to them authority, and I think we are, to remove things that violate the policy? Those are some of the questions I had with regard to that issue.
I think what you're going to find is some of the department heads are already utilizing it, just with no rules or guidelines, and certainly, the archiving part of it as well. And I think that it's going to vary by department how much time it's going to take. Some of them won't even use it. Others may use it, or they may consolidate it. I know we've had some discussion about the clerk's office and kind of having the city hall group, and there may be some other departments that piggyback into that group, and that'll be kind of one general one. But I know Park and Rec, Library, Senior Center, they've been using it quite a bit anyway for various activities that they're trying to promote. So for them, it really won't be a whole lot different. But there'll just be some official structure to it, I guess is the best way for me to put it. Do you want to follow?
Thank you, yeah. I guess I was looking at monitoring from the standpoint, and what I assumed it might mean is taking a look at it now and again to make sure there's nothing naughty going on the site, and what the responsibility might be with respect to addressing that. I was thinking that that was part of, yes, thank you.
So there is a specific provision in the policy which, and we had some discussion about how to handle this issue.
Right.
What we concluded, ultimately what the policy says is that one of the things the department head is required to do upon approving the use of a particular social media platform is there are two things they're required to do that are relevant to this. One, there needs to be a determination made that the department can effectively administer the site in accordance with the policy.
Mm-hmm.
And two, determine how often the authorized user, that would be the staff member who's responsible for the site, determine how often the authorized user should monitor the social media site. So that's supposed to have, there's supposed to be a discussion about that and a decision made about that when a decision is made to use a particular platform. And I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. I mean, different sites are going to maybe lend themselves to different kinds of monitoring requirements, or what would be appropriate for one site might not be appropriate for another one.
Okay. Can I follow again? Sure. So, thanks. And am I correct, though, Matt, that the department head would have some discretion or authority with regard to determining something that violates the social media policy and therefore could excise it from, the site?
There is a section of the policy itself which discusses what the user rules are.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain kinds of material that are not consistent with the policy, and those things can be removed, at least in terms of what's visible. Now, there still is a retention requirement, so those materials would still be saved if there was a need to ever see what it was and take a look at it, or if somebody made a request for it, it could be accessed. But yes, the policy does define certain things as inappropriate and creates there should be a way for the authorized user or the department head to manage that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I saw the definitions. I was just curious as to what level of discretion they had with regard to that, which I think is fine. I think you have to do it. I know I was on that committee at one point, and there were a lot of concerns that were discussed, including by you, with respect to making sure we're not violating First Amendment rights, and so we're kind of imposing some obligation on the part of these department heads to make that determination. The one more thing, and then I'm going to be quiet because I know this is very late, but I'm having a hard time distinguishing what I can, as a city council official, say. If I want to say something that really offends me about what the city is doing, do I preface that by saying, I'm saying this as Timothy Sean Riley, private citizen, and not as Timothy Sean Riley, city council person? Is that how I make sure that I'm not running afoul of the of the rule there?
So
I'm
going to have to review this section again to refresh my mind on this, but there is an entire section on official.
It's top of page 4. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Entire section on official and acceptable employee use.
Right.
And I apologize. It's just been a couple of months since I reviewed this, so I think you want to be careful before you, as an elected official or as an employee, use a city platform for the expression of your own personal opinions about policy issues or what have you. I don't think that's the intent.
Well, I think the concern is the walking quorum, isn't it? I mean, that could be a concern.
Right. What I'm making reference to is, notwithstanding other provisions of this policy does not restrict the ability of city employees or city council officials to speak as private citizens on matters relating to city business. So as I guess what I'm thinking and wondering is, as long as if I have something to say about like our sidewalk policy or something like that, if I say I'm saying this as personal citizen Timothy S. Riley, although I am on the city council, do I get away with that? Am I allowed to do that?
Yes, so long as you make it clear that you're acting as private
Right.
citizens and that your statements in no way represent the official position of
Right.
the city, and you are otherwise in compliance with the policy.
Thank you.
As any other user, you know,
Okay. Oh, no,
no
right.
no profanity.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, I
But-
appreciate it.
So is that your evil twin, or what is that?
That is, that's right.
Your alter ego, or maybe, or something?
Exactly, that's my Mr. Hyde.
Okay.
As we remember with school board service, there was always a caveat in with that about what you wanted to say and how you wanted to say certain things, just.
Hey, man, don't
Always
be
be
attacking my First
careful.
Amendment rights,
Be
bro.
careful.
For Mr. Riley, it might be based on the street where he lives, too.
I have often
You have a motion on that.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there is a motion and a second. Anybody have any other questions or relevant comments?
We did put the archival,
Kindness.
we did approve the archival thing for when we have, or when these are as public record already.
Yep. So we should be good to go. All in favor of the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Ooh, is that it?
That was quick.
Didn't we have to approve some people that you appointed, Mayor?
All in favor of
Already done,
adjournment?
that was in the packet.
Everybody in favor of adjournment? Okay.
Minutes.
Oh, so we approved the minutes.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for pointing that out.